So today we're going to be talking about shocks again. Do those budget shocks you buy on Amazon work any good? Are they worth the money? Today we're going to take a look at a whole bunch of different shock brands, and I'm just going to shed a little bit of light on some of the pros and cons of those cheap shocks, and also some of the pros and cons of the more expensive high-end shocks you can get for your crawlers and trailers. One of the things that's very important to your rig's performance and the suspension performance overall are shocks. That's why I'm doing a series on shocks. The first part was about general shock tuning and general shock performance and how the shocks work and how you can tune them in order to make your rigs work better. Understanding how the shock works will lead you to be able to tune them and tune your rig so that it performs for the way you like to drive and the terrain that you're driving on. Over my first several years of being involved in trailing and crawling, I have made a whole bunch of mistakes just by going through and buying things that I didn't know were garbage. Just like everybody else, sometimes you just have to learn by doing. So let's get on over to the table and start taking a look at some of the different shocks that I have to show you today. So as you'll see, I've got on the bench several different shocks. And this is a set of 4 shocks that comes from Amazon, relatively cheap. I paid about $23 for these for the set of 4, and overall they're not great, but they're not terrible. In the long run, they definitely have a tendency to leak, and they are not terribly easy to find springs that you can swap out for these. They also are a little bit difficult to take the springs off and on. As an example, I have one taken apart here. In order to actually get the springs off, you have to take the lower rod end off in order to get the whole thing to slide off. I'm sure everybody will recognize are the RC 4-wheel drive King piggyback dual spring shocks. I have to say, overall, I love the way these shocks look. I just wish that they performed a little better. I've had these shocks for quite a while, and as I zoom in and get closer, you can actually see the discoloration of the shaft. And what that discoloration is actually the chrome plating has worn off of the shock shaft, which means that these shocks begin to leak. Overall, like I said, the appearance of these, the scale looks of these are fantastic. If you're not running through real harsh terrain, I would say if you're doing trailing, but you're doing it at a much slower pace, more of a walking pace, anything beyond that where the shock is going to be moving up and down and absorbing quite a bit, you're going to wear those seals out and those shafts out a lot quicker. For me, for the price of these shocks, I believe these are about $35 for a set of 2. It's a bit pricey for a shock that just doesn't perform great and isn't actually all that great as far as longevity and getting worn out. Okay, so the next shock that I've got here is actually a piggyback shock with a rubber tube connector in it. I did run these shocks for quite a while, 3 or 4 months in my Capra. I really liked them. The only issue that I had with these shocks at all was that they tended to leak right around this connection, and 3 out of the 4 shocks had a similar problem, and I'm going to say it was probably I did a poor job of installing the hose. But overall, I was very, very happy with these shocks. These were relatively cheap on Amazon. I think I spent $35 for a set of 4. The only other thing about these that they are frustrating to build. You have to put the rubber tube in, you have to seat it, you have to screw in this little cap that mashes the rubber tube into the seal there. It does take a few tries to get it, but once you get it all put together, they work pretty good. They do leak a little bit, so you will end up refilling oil probably every second or third time out. You're going to have to take the cap off. You can either do it with the reservoir, or you can take it off the top of the shock and just refill the oil. Other than that, they work. These are still working pretty good. I had very light oil in there and very stiff spring because I was using it on the Capra. But overall, these were definitely not a bad shock. I was pleasantly surprised. So the next set of shocks that I have here are the scalar shocks from SSD. These are one of my favorite shocks for using when I'm building a scale rig. Really like the way they perform. I really like the seals that they use. They're tough, they don't leak, they offer excellent performance, and they have a pretty generic spring size, so it's fairly easy to buy springs to change your spring rate for heavier, more scaled out rigs. The SSD scalar shocks are a little bit more on the pricey side. So they are going to be more expensive, but this is an all aluminum body shock. The capture ring for the spring on the bottom is aluminum. So overall, it's a very, very high quality shock, and it's not something that you're going to need to do a lot of maintenance on, and it's not going to require needing to be replaced very often. Lastly are my absolute favorite shocks for crawlers and scalars and trail rigs, the Element RC regular aluminum body shocks. These are a large bore, so they don't work in every application. Some shock tower mounts are skinny and they can't handle that, so that is where I generally will go with the SSD for the smaller body. It also looks a little more scale. Longevity wise, I have been using Element shocks for quite a while. These are the original shocks from the original builder's kit that I bought about a month after the builder's kit came out. I've never replaced the seals or the shafts or the pistons in these shocks at all. The only thing I've ever done is change the oil. So in my opinion, these are well worth the money that you're going to spend for shocks. If you're looking for an upgrade and your truck or buggy can handle having the large bore shocks, I would absolutely suggest going with the Element RC shocks. They're amazing. And one shock that I didn't mention before, and that is traxxas. I have heard, I've never personally had a set of traxxas shocks, but I have heard that they are very good, and people that have them rave about them. So I'm going to give everyone and traxxas the benefit of the doubt and say that the traxxas shocks are very good, because I've heard it from enough people that I know and trust to say with relative confidence that the traxxas shocks are worth the amount of money that you spend on them. That being said, if I had the choice to spend the money for Element or the money for anything else that's on the market, I would still choose the Element shocks over everything. So, in closing, I would like to say thank you to everyone for all the support for the channel. Commenting, liking, I truly appreciate the support for the channel that you all have given me. I do ask that if you are not a subscriber, please go down, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so that you do get notifications when I come out with new videos, and hopefully I've given you some information that have helped you to be able to RC on a budget and still be able to have rigs that perform the way you want them to. Once again, thank you. We'll see you next time.